welcome our, first May guest on the Patreon interview series, Dr. Rob van Eerden, an archaeologist, uh, who has done some really interesting work in early art and artifacts from North Holland. So, without further ado, let's let you take the floor. Could you give us a little bit of background about your work here and this recent publication?
Yes, well, thanks for having me, first of all. I work as an archaeologist for a provincial museum. The province of North Holland is one of the 12 provinces. It's a regional governmental organization. And we own all the archaeological finds and collections from our province, which can date from the Neanderthal era, like 50 or 100,000 years old, until the Second World War. So it's an enormous wide span of control, so to speak. But I'm mostly interested in Roman times and early medieval times. Academic wise, I am a bit of a I am geographer originally and also language man. I studied Nordic languages, Germanic languages at the University of Amsterdam. So, although I work mainly with archaeological questions and research, I have a special interest for cultural landscapes, but on the other end, also the language development and everything that's in between has to do with artifacts, the way people lived, the way people thought, mythology, and so on. So that's a bit of an introduction, maybe.
And I think part of what's fascinating about that is that, of course, having that background in language too allows you to take a look at artifacts from a time when there's very little, if anything, written in
Absolutely.
for centuries, and give you a little bit of context behind what the say the oral world of the people creating these artifacts might have been by reasonable comparison to cognitive.
Oh yeah, I mean, as an archaeologist, I mean, the further you come in time, for example, in the Netherlands in the 17th century, you have an abundance of archaeological material and stuff from churches, from monasteries, and so on. There is an enormous abundance of the Christian world and the belief system and everything. There are remnants of old chapels and you name it. But from this pagan time and the people from those days, there is hardly anything left. Hardly anything left. And that's why the few finds that you find, if you study them well, they can mean so incredibly much to us. So it really boils down to understanding what you see and compare it. And now in the days of internet, and you can search in all other kinds of collections around the world or around Northern Europe mostly. And by comparing it, you see, you find the things and the ideas that we do, that Johan Nicolai and I, that's my co researcher and writer. And so we came to a couple of ideas of what we actually see and think we can conclude from metal finds from the 5th to the 8th century in our province.
And your work on, I believe the title was Archaeology in North Holland in the First Millennium.
Yeah, we can talk about two things that we wrote, Johan and I. The first one was the study we did into a certain brooch that we found in the village of Heilo. Heilo means Heil holy. It's a very old settlement in our province, and it's only the place name tells you that it must have been a holy place. And this brooch has certain shapes that we tried to explain, and we'll go into this later in this presentation. And it had to do with the two bird heads curling towards each other, and they must have a meaning. So this was this article that we did in the Archäologisches Korrespondenzblatt. It's a German magazine, so to say. And we published this to give an explanation to the certain ornaments that we saw on this type of brooch, because a couple of hundreds have been found in the Netherlands in total. I think about 25 in our province. And they have all the same type of kidney-shaped forms in them. But I show some pictures later on. And the other thing is that a couple of years later, we wrote this book. In fact, it's a double book. It's an enormous work. It was a couple of years' work. It was very good that there was a Corona crisis, because then we couldn't do anything else. We just sat on our chairs and we could read literature over and over again. Many books and articles that I've been reading for some years ago, and I had almost forgotten about. But due to the Corona crisis, we were able to make this synthesis. I mean, this is about 900 pages about the archaeology of the province of North Holland. And it's about settlements, landscapes, metal, coins, cemeteries, you name it. But one of the aspects that we wrote about was the religion, the pre-Christian religion. And from this chapter about pre-Christian religion, we made a translation into English, and that's the second article that I sent to you. So that's a different approach. Firstly, we try to, in our article, we try to explain certain ornaments or metal objects. And when we thought we understood that, we made this book about the entire history of the province of North Holland in the first millennium. That's these two books. And then we had this approach from the other side. So we described the pagan society and the pagan belief system that we believe must have been present in early medieval Frisia, I should say, because North Holland is a province. It's a very small, tiny little bit. I think it's about the size of Delaware, but there's 3 million people living there. But in fact, it's part of a larger area along the Dutch coast, the Frisian coast, where originally Old Frisian was spoken. You're familiar with, of course, with the Old Frisian language, which is closely related to Old English. So we really talk about Frisia and North Holland as being about 1/3 or 1/4 of the entire Frisian area. So that's what we did.
And I'm curious, as to the artifacts that you're finding, what are usually the context of them? Are they found in Teppen? Are they found in burial contexts? Or are they loose in strata of a particular era? What are there contexts in which you tend to find these artistic items?
Unfortunately, 90% of the items are found by metal detector searchers. So most of them are not even in our collection. They are at home with people who found them, and some of them are willing to hand them over to the government or to a museum like ourselves. But many of them, some of them I only have a picture of, or some of those searchers, they come to our museum with a little box and they present all kind of little scraps and pieces of metal, and every now and then we say, wow, this is important, this is a little thing, and they hardly knew what they found. But we have to go through hundreds and hundreds of finds, and every once in a while we discover a tiny little piece that we say, this is a little patch of the puzzle, you know. So where are they found? Well, if we are very lucky, like the brooch I told you about from Hilo that we did the first article about, was actually in a feature, like in the place where a well was dug. It was outside the well, but it was in the place, the big pit in the ground where the well was dug. So it could be dated very well. And it was the first half of the 7th century, but that's an exception, unfortunately. but we can date those artifacts quite well. They're from the second half of the sixth until the first 3/4 of the 7th century. And in the end of the 7th century, towards 670, then you can slowly sense the presence of Christians that come to our region. And then the old pagan symbols slowly, gradually disappear somewhat until they are completely vanished in about 690 or something. Did I say 680? Until 670, 680, and then they really disappear.
So this is happening on a similar, maybe slightly later time frame to Christianization in England.
Yeah.
Right? Just trying to frame this relative to other areas where there's a little bit more written evidence.
I think England was a bit earlier. The Frankish area was also a bit earlier, and Scandinavia, of course, was a lot later.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why from Scandinavia we know more or less similar objects and ornaments, but 200, 300, 400 years younger.
Mm-hmm.
And because in Scandinavia there is such an abundance of those artifacts, we can there's a lot more material that we can study, and of course written sources and runic texts and so on. But yeah.
Are there many or any runic sources from North Holland in this period?
On coins only. On coins, not on stone or wood or something. I think in the entire Netherlands, about 25 runic inscriptions were found, mostly in the Terp area, so the dwelling mounds, as you would call them, so man-made higher places in coastal area where people lived. About 23 or so are Anglo-Frisian, but 2 are found in Frankish areas outside of the Frisian area. And they are very important as well. Some in the river area just south of our province, and one in the furthest southernmost part of the Netherlands. But they are very interesting because Frankish runic inscriptions are quite rare, and we have 2 from the Netherlands. One is late 4th century, and the other one is, I think, 5th century.
Oh, very early too.
Very early too, yeah. But most of the Anglo-Frisian are 7th, early 8th century, I believe. But this is one of the topics that I wrote to you in emails. That I mean, there are so much sources that have to be combined to make a more or less complete picture of the pagan religion, that you have to know a little bit about everything. I mean, I don't have to tell you that to understand runic finds and texts and be able to explain them, that's a world on itself, so.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, could we take a look at some of your finds and some of these artifacts?
Yeah, I will try to share. I usually don't work with Zoom, so I have to get acquainted with this a little bit.
Sure.
Can you see this? Wait a minute.
Yes, I see 4 images of an artifact.
Yeah. Well, this is the start of it all, really. This is a brooch. It's about 7 centimeters long. You see a drawing, and then you see the brooch itself from the front side, from the back side, and in the middle from the side. And I mean, this is only to tie. It's all female ornaments. All those ornaments that I'm going to show you belong to females, which is peculiar in itself, I think. But what you see here, I have other pictures that I want to show you. This is, for example, a bunch of brooches of the same type that those detector amateurs hand over, then you see sometimes it's just bits and pieces. But as long as they are recognizable for us archaeologists, they count, you know. So some of them are more or less, for example, number 6 is almost complete. Others are, I mean, they are found on acres. So they are plowed a couple of times, and they are almost all of them are made of bronze, and they deteriorate, they erode slightly, they corrode, and so they break up in pieces. But the ones that were best visible and recognizable, we photographed in the book. And this is one of the funny thing about this type of brooch, the Domburg brooch, is in fact exclusively found in the Frisian area. You have a couple of finds in Britain and some in Germany and one in Denmark, but it's mostly the Dutch coastal landscape. And if you look at the development of this type of brooch, you see that the oldest one on the left, they clearly have this kidney-shaped head plate, but you can see that this kidney shape is in fact two bird heads that curved towards each other, and they have very curved beaks. And you have to keep this in mind because this is a specific shape that occurs a lot in the entire Germanic world. And it must have a meaning. And the meaning of this was something that we really wanted to chase down. What can this mean? What are these birds? And then you see that so this type of bow brooch, I mean, they have a head plate, then they have a bow, and they have a foot plate. And the foot plate on the Domburg brooch also has this double curved bird heads and beaks. So this kidney shape occurs twice. And then on the shoulder of the foot plate, I will have a better picture. You see it here. This is the explanation that we had to the ornaments that we think we see on this type of brooch. So the upmost kidney shape is in fact an abstract version of the two birds with curved beaks facing each other. But then the footplate is a kind of a human face with eyes and a nose and some kind of a beard or mustache-like shape. So it's in fact a kind of a human face with pairs of birds. So we examined a couple of those brooches, and then I make the step to the next type of brooch that we also examined, and that's, oh, wait a minute, this is also a Domburg brooch, a very beautiful one, a gilded silver one, a very big one. And then you see that these curved bird heads still have they have beautiful ornaments to it and so on. And they have always the same type of, bird heads curved towards each other, often with even the beaks pointed out really, and the eyes of the birds are still visible often. And then I make the next step that makes it even clearer. In the middle, we see this type of brooch. This is slightly bigger. It's about 8 or 9 centimeters, if I recall correctly. This is a very nice brooch, also found in Friesland. And you see on the head plate that you see in the middle of those head plates, you see this face-like shape. And it's flanked by animals on the left and right side. And then you see again on the footplate, farthest below of the middle of the of the one in the middle, you see the exact same bird heads again. You can clearly see their beaks curled towards each other, and the eyes of the birds. And on the shoulder of the footplate, you see another pair of birds with curved beaks. And that's the symbolic language. If you know what you're looking for, you find it everywhere on ornaments in the entire Germanic world. And that's what brought us to thinking more closely, what can this mean? This human face with animals on both sides of the face, often curved towards the human face. And there are many, many other ornaments that show this. So does this make any sense to you, Jackson, or is it what do you think of it? Is it vague or?
I think it makes perfect sense. I mean,
It does.
designs start somewhere, and finding what this, when you see that curving design, finding that that's originating as two birds, of course, gives you a hint as to why it became a design in the first place. I don't know whether people later think of it as being two birds, as they're just carving two little swooping lines, but certainly implies that that's what originally they see. And then, of course, I don't know, the middle part where you see a human face, are there artifacts where any of these brooches where that face is fairly clear, where you have like a clearly
Well,
anthropomorphic shape?
well, the shape of the face is the thing is with mythology on artifacts. It's and then we make the jump to the question: who can this face be? And we think it's Woden, or in later ornaments, Odin, as he's called later on, at least in Scandinavia. The form language, the visual language, is always ambiguous. Human faces turn into animal faces, and not only they can be wolves, they can be wild boars, they can be horses. Sometimes they can be both. Sometimes the horse has breath coming out of his mouth and it resembles the nostrils of the horse or the breath of the person or something. That all, if you look closely and if you dive into the, I mean, you know that this all can have a mythological meaning to it. And also the combination. But to go back to your question, it's, I must admit that it's not easy. I will have a look at, for example, we found. Wait a minute, where am I? We found this little piece, which is the center. Can you see this little face?
Yes.
I mean, it's tiny, but this is the middle part of a head plate, which clearly shows. I mean, my wife says, I mean, do you really see a human face in this? And I say, yes, it has to be human face. You see the eyes, you see the nose,
Mhm.
and then you see the mouth and some kind of moustache shape. And the thing is, you have to know what you're looking for until you see it. But if you compare this find with other artifacts, for example, this is a face
Mhm.
on another brooch, and here you see more clearly two eyes, a nose, and something that must resemble a mouth. Are they teeth? Is it a mustache, or what is it? And on the right on the right picture, on the same level, you see a sort of human face, but from the seen from the side with an eye and some kind of mouth or something.
Mhm.
But I mean, in old Germanic, also on coins and on artifacts, you see that originally from the beginning, and then I'm talking about Roman times, it's of course uh, abstract versions of Roman empires, and they are developed in a specific northern way, in a Germanic way, into some kind of, well, very abstract, maybe half secret or not all too clear shapes that present some kind of deity.
Mhm.
But why they don't, I mean, if you look, for example, on Brachtiads, there you see human figures and faces that are much more clearly shown. But on our brooches, the faces are not as all as easy to distinguish as, for example, the birds. But still, the eyes are almost always present, some kind of nose and a mouth with mustache or something.
I
But it's not,
absolutely see both of these as human
you
faces.
do.
And I think part of what we have to keep in mind is that the human mind is very keen to see human faces and things, and it probably always has been. So if we can see a face there, I suspect that probably ancient people saw a face there.
Mm.
I mean, if you look at the clouds or you look at just a couple nights ago, I saw the Northern Lights for the first time, and I was surprised
Mm.
how many times I thought I saw sort of human faces resolve themselves out of those swirling colors. I think people
Yeah.
are primed to see faces. So if we can see a face, two eyes, and something below it, probably the ancient artists intended for us to.
Oh, absolutely. I think so too. But if I can make the step that the scientific step that made us that made it easier for us to really believe what we see is, for example, if I may, I just click whatever I feel like, Jackson. I hope that's all right for you to
Sure.
make clear to you and the audience what I'm talking about. There are other artifacts. For example, this little mound that was found on the English countryside. Do you see this one?
Yes.
The thing is, the two curved bird heads are the thing that fascinated us the most. And if you look at this little human face, this is from pagan times. It's from England. You have dozens of them. If you look on internet, you see them in gold, in bronze, in silver, in all kinds of types and shape. And you see two eyes, you see a human face looking at you with a mustache, with a nose, with two eyes, with a beard. And on top of his head, you see two curved birds with often curved beaks. And I mean, they occur so often on all kinds of other objects that they simply have to mean something. There can be no doubt about it. Um, I have other examples, and one of the best examples is. Wait a minute. Do you still see this? Wait a minute. Where am I?
I still see the English example, the one with the golden.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. But I lost my.
That's an amazing artifact. And you can, I mean, the face is so clear and kind of expressionful, and the two birds strike me as having very heavy beaks, like ravens or eagles.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. If you look, for example, onto the at the famous buckle of I'm sorry.
Oh, that's right.
uh, I try to
This,
get.
one thing that strikes me just as I'm looking at this is the economy with which the face is rendered. It's not a lot of lines. Um, Even the hair is only sort of lightly suggested by very sparse streaks,
Yeah, that's right.
but it's still
Yeah,
done in such a way that it creates a very clear and even, as I said, kind of expressionful face.
Yeah, that's right. The one that I want to show you is this one. I'm not used to Zoom. That's a bit of a, but I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Just
Right.
wait a minute.
You spent 2020 writing a book, and the rest of us spent it on Zoom, and I think you did a better.
Yeah, that's right. Do you see this one? The nice
Yes.
buckle
Yes.
of Fingalsham in England. I'm sorry, it took a while to search for it. But if you look at this little man on this buckle, you see this guy with a face, a bearded face, looking at you, and also he has those curved birds with curved beaks towards him, standing on his head. And the fact that they can represent some of they sometimes they are called a horned helmet, but they are not horns. They are birds.
Mhm.
They are birds that, in fact, are on his head. But sometimes, and I have to show you some other type of artifact, and that's this one. I will stop.
Well, once you point out the images where the birds are clearer, then when you see an image like that, where there's just a little bit of detail, it's still, you realize that it's a simplification of the same design with that curve suggesting the bird's beak.
Now we're getting there. That's right. If you know what you're looking for, you see it. This one is the top of a scabbard. I mean the it's the end of the thing that you wear a sword in. You know, that's a scabbard.
Mhm.
And this is the one found in eastern part of Germany, but they are found uh, a couple. Many more are found in Germany and also in England. And here you see the same idea. You see a human face with his nose, with his mouth and mustache and eyes, and you see again those curved beaks curling towards his face, or rather ears maybe. They are 5th century. And I mean, this idea, it's like you just said, it's the same idea that reoccurs throughout the Germanic world. The two birds curving towards a human face or flanking a human face. So this bearded man and his two birds together, they must have a certain meaning in the 5th to 8th century. And that's really what we investigated.
Mhm. And I think that you're right to suggest that this is clearly a depiction of that there is something in the artist's mind that this corresponds to, and not just a combination of elements that are are common in art, or otherwise you would expect that this would be sort of combined and recombined in more forms. But if you always see this the face with the two birds look very similar. It seems like they're kind of going for a similar depiction of the face too, with
Yeah,
for example, the very prominent mustache. It seems to me to be one picture in the artist's mind.
yeah, that's right. And I can show you many more pictures. And the thing is that even on Brachtiates, if you look, you see same kind of idea. You see a man, a bearded man, often from the side, because it was derived from a Roman, the picture of a Roman Empire originally, with his beard and long hair, and often accompanied, of course, by a horse, but also birds in the air with curved beaks that are very close to him.
Mm.
And you see this element also, for example, on helmets, Scandinavian helmets, part of which are also found in our country, those nose bits with all, that also show a human face, but also the head of a horse or the head of a wild boar or something. And then the funny thing is that I know. Have you ever heard of a Norwegian archaeologist? Lotte Heidegger is her name. She wrote a lot about animals in old Germanic belief. It's very fascinating. And she said that on many ornaments, you see the role, the kind of mythical roles that animals seem to have, and they can. There are humans that turn into animals and back again, and turn from one animal type into another animal. And that's also part of the belief system, that they can switch sides, humans or animals. So there is a close relationship between religion, deities, and animals. And the very nice thing is that I wrote a very nice thesis made by a Swedish archaeologist, Andreas Norberg, and he described the way that these animals in the Edda had a certain function of gathering the flesh of deceived warriors on the battlefield, as if they were helping. Uh,
Well, I, I remember reading this as if they're helping they're conducting the body just as they're conducting the person, right? They don't have the separation of body and soul conceptually that I think uh, Christian and post-Christian culture tends to have. But by taking the body away, they're taking the person away, taking them
yeah,
up, right?
that's right. Taking them up, yeah. So in fact, they were a kind of a different form that Odin or Wodan would take to collect the most brave warriors as a kind of offering, a kind of sacrifice from the battlefield to take them to someplace else. That's his idea. So that's why the relationship between a deity as Wodan and those scavenging animals, because not all animals are taken, but it's, for example, I mean, it's clear that people thought that the wolf and the eagle were tough, beautiful, courageous animals, and uh, like even the old indigenous American people, I mean, they thought that eagles and all kinds of uh, how do you say it, beautiful animals were used in the names of people or something. But for example, also the wild boar, and funny enough, the raven is also taken. Now, a raven is a beautiful animal. I mean, you as a bird lover, I think you can also. I mean, ravens are beautiful. They are big. They are strong. They are a bit mysterious. They make beautiful sounds, but they are scavengers, and that's the funny thing. Why I think they were clever, and they were also accompanying Wodan all the time in the Edda. So I think those two birds accompanying this bearded man, I think it makes sense that they are in some way the ravens that accompanied Odin or Wodan. Although it's difficult to explain the particularly curved beaks. That's more like eagles, in fact. But then again, birds, they could turn into each other. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and ravens have a very sharply decurved beak, which I think that curve does a good job of suggesting. And it also, if they're the ravens, I think that it suggests a reason why you might depict them in art, because if they're the conductors of the dead to Odin, then in a sense, it's not very different from the prominence of angels in Christian art.
Exactly, absolutely. Or Valkyren in the Germanic world, or
Mhm.
something. Yeah, but they
Oh,
are helping. Yeah.
and I mean, I've wondered, and I don't think I'm the originator of the idea, but I've wondered if the term Valkyria, chooser of the slain, is originally a poetic name for the raven, right? And that this sort of
Mm.
later gets anthropomorphized into into the human women who conduct the dead. But of course, the ravens literally do it.
Yeah.
So that's not an impossible thought, but something I've idly mused about. So I
Hmm.
think that fits very well into that scenario. It gives a nice reason for this motif to develop. And by the way, if you have more examples of this, I know I'd love to see as much as you would show us, and I think everyone else here would too.
Yeah, I will try to show some more. For example, wait a minute. These are the pictures that I use. For example, this is a very nice one. This was found in Austria in a
Which one?
lump. Uh, oh, you don't see
I
this.
just see your.
Oh, wait a minute. Um, Wait a minute. I have to do it once again.
And I think at this juncture too, if anyone wanted to make a insert a question or make a comment, please feel free in the chat. I can.
You know what's easier for me? I just go through the pictures that I want to use in this presentation, and I will tell you what I see. That's much easier.
Sure, sure.
This is a purse from the famous burying in England at Sutton Hoo. And what do we see here? We see uh, left and right, we see a standing man with a beard and mustache with animals left to the left and the right. You see, this must be two uh, wolves, I think. But in the middle, you see the two birds, raven-like birds with the curved beaks again. Do you see?
Hmm.
So this is also early 7th century. We think it's the pagan prince Redwold, I think. But it's the same idea. It's a bearded man between two animals, and you see the same kind of raven-like birds. This is on the helmet, I think, from Uppsala. They are those stamped pictures that depict a warrior-like man with two spears, and then you see this helmet-like with also those two birds on top of the helmet. So it's a kind of it's a warrior-like dancing man in some kind of ecstasy, and he's accompanied by some kind of wolf-like warrior. I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, many books have been written in Scandinavia about the meaning of this. But the thing I want to underline is that it's the same type of person with his two birds on top of his head, accompanied by other animals. So the relationship between warriors and animals in battle is very clear. This is another example from England. You see again, this is a little mound only. It's gilded silver or gilded bronze, I think. You see the same man with his two little, in this case, quite little birds on top of his head, but they mean something. I mean, it's no coincidence that this bearded man that looks in a strict way, that looks you in the eyes, he has those the same kind of birds on his head again. I don't go into this. This is from some kind of buckle also. It's a with also human face, and in this case, one of the eyes is removed.
Hmm.
This we can talk about later. I mean, you know that in the Edda, Odin had only one eye, but in the depiction of the older forms of Wodan, we almost never see that one eye is missing. So sometimes I think maybe the whole idea of Wodan or later on Odin losing one of his eyes was something either that developed later on or wasn't present in the continental variant of the worshipping of Wodan.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, we don't
I'm
know
not
how old
sure.
we don't know how old that story is, and the only attestation of it is in writing is in Scandinavia, so hard to say.
That's right. That's right. And I was fascinated by your the video that you did on the Merseburger Zaubersprüche, the second one, in which it's one of the very few times that Wodan is mentioned on the continent.
Hmm.
And I mean, you described that we don't know. I mean, all I'm telling you is just a construct, is just the best guess that we have, of course. But the more on themselves, we try to combine as many sources as possible. And all of these sources, whether you're talking about depictions on coins or on brooches, on some written sources, on the names of the days that in Holland also are the generic gods like Tius, Wodan, Donar, Freya. That's not, I mean, that's no coincidence. It can't be a coincidence. It survived centuries of Christianity. They couldn't wipe it out. So I think um, I lost track of what I was going to say. Anyway, what you said about the Merseburger Zaubersprüche and the fact that Wodan occurs there, it's only one time, but it must have a meaning. And you also said, and I agree with that completely, maybe the continental variants of Edda-like sagas was a bit different or quite different from the end result that we find in the Eddas, but many aspects must have been more or less the same, is our idea.
We can't
Yeah.
imagine that they were completely different. They have the same names, and uh, even though we don't have, well, we don't have a Dutch Edda, a Frisian Edda, a German Edda. We
Unfortunately.
Yeah, but all that we've got to go by is the Icelandic Edda. So if we find something in these non-written sources that agrees with something that's in those written sources, the only real lens that we have through which to interpret it is that Icelandic Edda.
Yeah, that's
Those
right.
two ravens being so or what looked to me, and I think to you, like ravens being so prominent in the art, obviously the closest at hand source of interpreting that is going to
Mm,
be written Icelandic mythology, and the interpretation of the ravens as Odin's birds, whether his particular two birds or his ravens more generally, I think makes
mm,
perfect sense in that light. But
mm,
I don't think that it's irresponsible to say, for example, when we see art that points toward Odin on the continent, the one eye, well, actually, sometimes it seems to be there, isn't isn't
sometimes, yeah.
always there.
Yeah.
Uh, and I wonder that could originate from lots of different things. It could be that the myth of his losing one eye is fairly late and spreads fairly late. It could be regional. Um, it's only in Scandinavia or maybe parts of adjoining West Germanic speaking areas. Could also be
Mm,
uh, there's a mythic present in which he has both eyes and a mythic future in which he has one eye.
mm,
Since the story of his losing the eye is only told really narratively once by Snorri, um,
mm,
it's not that clear that maybe in some stories that are presented as being in the mythic present in the poems of the Poetic Edda, that maybe it's before he loses the eye. Perhaps this is something that happens in the sequence leading up to Ragnarok, but maybe isn't yet in all parts of the mythic present.
mm,
Something like the death of Balder has happened in some stories and hasn't in others.
Mm.
It's another possibility. But
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One funny thing I want to show you, and then maybe I will stop.
there's a few questions in the chat too that I'll ask
Oh,
you.
there's a few questions, Chet. I can take them first.
Okay. This first one is from Jay. And in fact, he asked the question that basically we just talked about. So, okay, about his one-eyedness. Uh, Stuart also asks, you mentioned how depicting faces was originally inspired by depictions of Roman emperors. Are there any Roman depictions of two birds, or is that entirely a Germanic tradition?
I there are I don't really know exactly. There are some depictions of animals, for example, dolphins, but they are very, very different, and they don't seem to have any um, mythological meaning to a deity or something. But I must admit that's more my colleague Johan's thing that has studied Roman artifacts much more than I did. So the whole idea that animals were used in some kind of jewelry is Roman, but the clear meaning of animals helping a bearded man is Germanic.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And like you
absolutely.
said, the Bracteates often feature the same animals.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But of course, that could inspire, and I think I see what causes Stuart to ask it. If the Bracteates are based on these Roman depictions, do those Roman
Mm-hmm.
coins have those animals? And I don't think so, other than maybe the emperor riding a horse, but it's typically the face of the emperor.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's completely true that many of the symbols, like for example the emperor as being the top dog warrior, and to present him on a coin, uh, originates in the Roman world or even earlier, I think. But then uh, metal objects, for example, coins that were paid by emperors to satisfy Germanic tribes not to invade the Byzantine Empire or something. Those coins were brought to the Germanic north, and people would look at them, and of course, they would get inspired, and they would depict some kind of warrior like leader. Uh, and at first, it was kind of it resembled the Roman Empire, the Roman emperor. But later on, they made their own gods of it, and they added specific mythological ideas that combine their leaders and their religious leader, like Bodon or other Germanic gods, and then combine them with their helping powers. So originally, many of those thoughts and ideas stem from Roman objects, but in a couple of centuries, they are completely used in a local Nordic northern way, and they tell the northern story.
Hmm. They're naturalized.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Uh, Alexandra asked, how densely populated was the Frisian coast in the early ninth century? And would people who spoke Old Norse have understood the people speaking Old Frisian?
we 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 tried to estimate how many people there were in the entire in Frisia in those days, and I have to look it up exactly, but it there weren't many. I mean, I think it's about between 10 and 15,000 people only living in Frisia in those days.
Hmm.
And could they with their Frisian language understand Scandinavian? I mean, one of the interesting question is uh, there was a Germanic speaking area, but if you would travel from Frisia to northern Germany, you would not at all have the boundary that you today have between the Dutch language and the High German language that you speak there. But it was a gradual, how do you say it, sequence of dialects until you got along the German coast towards the southern part of Denmark. I think in the southern part of Denmark, they spoke also some kind of North Sea Germanic that was related to Old Frisian, Old English, or something. And later on, I think only later on, the true Scandinavian languages would crawl southwards and, in fact, pushed away the North Sea Germanic dialects from that area. But then again, I think the dialects in the northern world, in the Scandinavian countries that we know today, I think more or less they could understand each other. I think so, but that's more a question that you could answer, Jackson. You know a lot more about those old languages than I do.
Well, I can't answer it definitively, but I think that it's very likely that in, well, I mean, you have to pick a time, and if we're saying early ninth century, yeah, I think that there'd be grounds for communication without having to. I think it would be a little bit like with Old English and Old Norse that you have a similar difference as between, say, Spanish and Portuguese. It's very obvious to speakers of one that the other is a related language, and you're not so much learning a new language as you are figuring out, oh, when I say this, they say this, and you kind of figure out the patterns after a while, and you can kind of get used to it, get an ear for understanding it. I suspect that it was something like that. In fact, Old Frisian might have been easier to understand at this time for an Old Norse speaker than Old English was, because Old English had undergone some of those palatalizing changes that Old Frisian hadn't or hadn't yet undergone.
Mm.
And let's see, Nate asked, Celtic art often uses two birds, for example, on the Wadsworth shield and the horse head. Do you think there's a correlation? Do the Frisian artifacts align with any of the European migration patterns?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know very much about the uh, Celtic evidence myself. And Blake says, I'm not sure if this was mentioned, but there seems to be reason to think the Sudden Who helmet portrays someone with one eye.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. At least the Satanu helmet had some kind of, I think, ornament in one eyebrow that it didn't have on the other eyebrow, so that in the darkness of the hall, where the celebrations were held with torch fire and so on, one eye would stand out and shine, and the other one wouldn't. But I'm not perfectly sure how much evidence there is for the one-eyedness of the Southern Who Odin. I don't know.
Blake says there's gems on one eye that would reflect light, but not on the other eye. I
Yeah.
mean, it's also possible, whatever the status of this one-eyed idea, which we've belabored a little bit in say in North Holland and the late first millennium, you can actually have both ideas coexisting side by side, either because there's just differences in regional opinion of how to depict Odin, but also, again, you could have sort of a sequential myth where there's myths of Odin before he's lost his eye and after, and that it's not regarded as the prime signifier of who Odin is, but the ravens could be, or something else that we don't see in the visual language.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Jay asks if there's plans to translate your book beyond the one chapter.
That's a financial question. The thing is, this was the most international chapter. Originally, the idea was that we would translate the entire book, but I mean, it's quite costly, and most of it is very Dutch. It's fantastic that this exists for Dutch readers in the first place, but I think translating in German would be of about the would also be very very useful. But I hope that one day it will be translated entirely. But I mean, it's costly, and it's not really a concrete plan that we have now, fortunately.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that those are not not easily made and quickly achieved decisions. You know?
No, exactly.
Well, I really appreciate the looks at these artifacts and you sharing your work with us. I shared the article that you had sent me with Patreon. Is there other work that you would tell people to look at, especially English speaking readers?
Mm, not really, I'm afraid, because as I told you, I have to deal with all kinds of periods and excavations and artifacts. This is just one of the many things I have to deal with. Right now, we're dealing with a 17th century shipwreck somewhere in the sea just north of our province. I mean, it's filled with beautiful finds, and those wrecks it lies about 10 meters deep, and it's robbed by sport divers just taking away all kinds of beautiful artifacts that were traded from the Ottoman Empire and so on. So I have to deal with all kinds of funny things. But speaking about, maybe I can. Is there time to show you one more last artifact?
Sure.
This was a very peculiar thing. Um, I found this one in the middle. You see this pendant, a coin-like pendant. Do you see it? I
Mhm.
found this on internet on an auction gallery. And I thought, wow, this is a beautiful one. Do you see it? It depicts
Yes.
a bearded man looking at you with bird heads curved towards him. And you see even the bodies and the feathers of the birds. And you also see, you have to look at it more clearly, that he has his both arms wrapped around the birds as they are literally talking to him in his ears. Do you see that?
Yeah, I mean it's almost it has an almost modern feeling in this very
Yeah. And
anthropomorphized period.
that's what made me suspicious. That's what made me exactly. And I thought, can this be true? Can this be true? So I found the auction gallery people there, and they said, yeah, we'll go. I wanted to know if this is genuine, if this is not a forgery, because it's almost too beautiful to be true. But then again, the way it's made, I mean, you don't make this up by yourself if you don't know the story, do you? So I thought it may be authentic because it's a bit chip carved like it could be late 5th early 6th century still, but I was still hesitating, and I contacted people of the British Museum, and they said, we don't know this find, we can't tell that it's sincere, that it's authentic, but we have similar objects. And then you go to the artifact that you see most right
Mhm.
in the screen, and it has the same depiction. It's not as beautiful and as outspoken as the first one I showed you, but the idea of the bearded man with the two birds on both sides of his ears and the feathers and his arms wrapped around him is the same.
Yeah.
And then I looked on the internet, and I found the same artifact in all kinds of variants. They're not the same. They are not the same dye that was used over and over again. It's the same idea made by different artists, but with the same idea. You see it best on the one on the right hand. It's a bearded man facing you with his two birds, and it's the same period, sixth century.
I kind of love this design. I've never seen, you know, as much as people redo the same designs from the Viking Age on
Yeah.
reproduction art. I've never seen a reproduction of these, and I really love this.
This is beautiful, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's kind of they're companionably hugging.
They are his friends. They are the birds are his friends, and that's really. I mean, if you there are some Scandinavian depictions of some kind of rider, a warrior with a spear, with two companions flying over his head with curved beaks. And the Scandinavians say, well, this is Odin with his two ravens. On the continent and in England, we don't have the Edda, so we are a bit more cautious. We say, well, yeah, this must be a warrior with two birds just accidentally passing him, or these are his friends, and we don't really dare to call the Edda also of value of our continental mythology. But maybe we should dare to do that still.
Yeah, we can do. You can responsibly apply evidence from the Edda. You can go over the top with it, but that's not what you're doing to say that here is the most closely related tradition with a written evidence from the mythology. We find ravens in it all over the place. Here are ravens in visual art of a people speaking a very close related language a few centuries before that. It's not an overstatement to interpret it.
It's not. I'm glad you say this is not irresponsible. I don't think it is. I mean, we need an explanation, and this is the best guess that we have. One more example of a very abstract way of what once was the Roman emperor is this funny-looking poor guy. I mean, they have really done something to his face, but this is an example of how original Roman emperors were treated in order to make a nice picture on a gold coin. This is a typically Frisian variant of a Tremises gold coin. It's very small. It's about 1.5 centimeters in diameter. But here you see that originally it was Roman, but look what they've done to the Roman shapes. Now it's something that is barbaric in shape, of course. This is a truly nice, if I may go on just a little bit, this is a very nice Thuringian brooch. So it's the southern part of Germany. Here you see clearly on the footplate. If you look at the one most right, you see the head plate, two eyes facing you. Mm-hmm. You see also some kind of nose and a mouth, and they are very similar to the first Dutch finds that I showed you. But his eyes are formed by two curved bird heads and beaks. You see? Mm-hmm. So this is one last item that I want to show you, one of the last examples of a bearded face looking at you, and his face is flanked by animals, but his face also consists of animals.
It's very artistic.
Yeah, isn't it beautiful?
I like it a lot.
Yeah.
And it would be difficult to do in a less abstract style.
Yeah.
Well, these have been some really, really amazing artifacts to see. I mean, this stuff does not get shared. You see the same, again, 5 or 6 artifacts, typically Scandinavian, that get shared in all the books and websites, and there's so much out there, and including from areas that people don't talk about as much, partially because they don't have the written literature. But obviously, I think this work is very fascinating, and I'll continue to watch what you're putting out in the future. If for those who read Dutch too, academia.edu, you have several papers there. Mm. Is that right? Or would you point people toward other places?
Well, we just recently started to put material on academia because that's really only for English reading people. I will, whenever I have something, I will let you know, and then you can point it out for your Patreon supporters if I have something. But the thing that you just said is very true, that the artifacts and what is found in Scandinavia, often called Viking, which is 9th century and earlier, but before this, the migration period, or the how do you call it, the
or Vendel period, or whatever.
Vendel period, the Merovingian period, and so on. In this period, in fact, it's very interesting that there are many similarities between Scandinavian art and continental Germanic art, but they are untold stories. And never shown anywhere because I don't know, not too many people are busy with it. In my country, people are busy with the Romans. And sometimes when we have a Scandinavian find, we say, wow, we found a Viking. But the local people that spoke a local language, they are for some reason less sexy or something. I'm not so sure. I'm one of the very few who dives to this and recognizes artifacts, and that's why I said to you, as a YouTuber, you have a very interesting position by combining language, mythology, and sometimes even archaeology, because you have to look at different sources altogether, because all the sources by themselves are all weak, but combined, they make a more or less cohesive picture. And that's what you need to really understand it. If you don't do that, it's all vague and difficult to believe.
Well, and obviously people are curious about the whole picture of the past that we can create. And to do that, we have
Yeah.
to have evidence from every branch that we can. So
Mm,
my home branch is the language, but I try to get people to, like yourself, to come and talk about other
yeah.
branches. And I've really appreciated that you did. Where can we purchase your book? Where is that available?
Um, I, I mean, it's my book is really. I think it would be best to write me an email and give your address, because this is a book, only a couple of hundreds were made. I mean, they are
Oh,
beautifully made, but we don't export them a lot to other countries. But if you have special requests, I can do an arrangement. We
okay.
had a congress 2 years ago, and there were all kinds of international scientists here, and they could go to our museum shop and they bought. Some of them went home with enormous bags with literature in Dutch. I was very surprised, because who can read Dutch? Almost nobody. But they have a kind of English language summary. So yeah, you can write me an email. That would be best.
Okay. I don't think Dutch is that hard to read. I mean, there's more resources than for old Frisian. So
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. And then again, I mean, Dutch, if you speak any Germanic language and you have the will to understand it, it's not that difficult either.
yeah. Well, I've really, really appreciated your time, and thank you especially for having all the illustrations to hand so that we could look at exactly what you were talking about.
Hmm.
And we'll hope to have you back at some point to talk about more of your work. And for
Yeah, of
now,
course.
thank Patreon and wish everyone all the best.
Thank you very much for having me. It was my pleasure.
Very much mine.